In your patience possess ye your souls. In your patience possess ye your souls. That is a very important statement that was generated by Jesus Christ. You find that in the middle of the Olivet prophecy. And very, very significant because that's the mindset that we're to have. In other words, if we are to be patient, we're not going to be uh, driven by every wind of doctrine. We're not going to be startled or surprised to the point where we just lapse into panic mode. That's not the standard for a Christian, not here at the end time. But in our patience possess we our souls. And that's important for us as a directive to follow. To more illustrate the need to not react out of fear, I want to bring the following account that actually did occur. It was on Sunday, October 30th, 1938. It occurred in a little radio station in New York City, where it was operated by a genius by the name of Orson Welles, who had a great deal of experience in theatrics, drama, and he hired professional actors and they used them to be able to produce uh, an amazing 1 hour story. That story revolved around the 1898 edition of the book War of the Worlds. It was a sci fi novel that was written at the turn of the last century about Martians landing on the Earth and then invading it, taking it over. And there was to be a spoof on this particular day because it was Halloween, and Orson Welles decided that he would do that. Now, at the beginning of the program, he said exactly what was going to happen. It was going to be a spoof the next hour, a spoof on the War of the Worlds. That it was pure fiction, and that it was done, put together for the enjoyment of the audience. What he did not take into account is that 90% of his regular listeners, which was about 6 million people, those regular listeners, 90% of them did not hear the introduction. And the reports and the activity that was presented in the hour-long program was so compelling, so convincing that millions of people believed that it was happening, that the Martians were taking over. They had come to New Jersey, to a little obscure place called Grover Mills, and it was just two houses, in the middle of a cornfield. In fact, the way it was discovered, Wells said, I just took my hand and went over the map of New Jersey and it landed right there. Oh, what village is that? Grover Mills. And that's how that started. So on that particular night, the broadcast began with orchestra music, and it seemed kind of normal. But a few minutes into it was the statement, we interrupt this regularly scheduled program for a news bulletin. And apparently, there had been a series of explosions on the planet Mars. That's all we know for now. More later if it becomes available. We return you back to New York City, to the ballroom of the Grand Plaza Hotel. So then in the background, you would hear orchestra music, dancing, and it sounded so real and so innocent. But a few minutes later, then interruption number two comes across. Ladies and gentlemen, we interrupt this program to update you on the activity regarding the planet Mars. We have another astronomer near Princeton, New Jersey, who has felt that either a meteorite or some kind of metal object smashed into the ground south of here at a place called Grover's Mill, New Jersey. And before you knew it, then there was an on-spot reporter that had just happened to be there at the site where this meteor smashed into the earth. And except it wasn't a meteor, it was certainly a metal object. And so this person, Carl Phillips, begins to report. He says, the meteor that we thought it was here turns out to be a 30 wide metal cylinder that is making a hissing sound. The top began to rotate like a screw. And then Carl Phillips reported that he witnessed the following. And he says, ladies and gentlemen, this is the most terrifying thing I've ever witnessed. Wait a minute. Wait a minute. Someone's crawling. Someone or something. I can see it peering out of that black hole, two luminous discs. Are they eyes? It might be a face. It might be. Oh no. Something's wiggling out of the shadows like a gray snake. And now another one. And now another one. And now another one. They look like tentacles to me. There, I can see the thing's body. It's larger than a bear, and it glistens like wet leather. But that face, ladies and gentlemen, it's indescribable. I can hardly force myself to keep looking at it. It's so awful. The eyes are black and gleam like a serpent, and the mouth kind of V-shaped, with saliva dripping down from its rimless lips that seem to quiver and pulsate. Then, as if that's not enough, he describes that the invader has taken out a weapon, and he says a hump-shaped individual is rising out of the pit. I can make out the small beam of a light against the mirror. What's that? There's a jet of flame springing from the mirror, and it leaps right at the advancing men and strikes them head on. Oh no, they've been vanquished and turned into flames. And now the whole field's caught on fire. The woods, the barn, the gas tank automobiles. It's spreading everywhere. It's coming this way. It's about 20 yards to my right. Then zzz, this buzz sound followed by silence. Orwell was a master at theater. He allowed the silence to go on for a couple of minutes. And then, a few minutes later, another announcer interrupts. Ladies and gentlemen, I've just been handed a message that came from Grover Mills by telephone. Just a moment, please. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Uh, at least 40 people, including 6 state troopers, lie dead in a field east of the village of Grover Mills. Their bodies burned and distorted beyond all recognition. And the audience is stunned by the news. Remember, 90% of the 6 million believe this is for real. And they started contacting their relatives around the country and other people saying, hey, Mildred, Martha, did you know what's going on up over there? Oh, no, what's happening? It's on the radio. It's on WCBS. You need to get in on this. Well, I'm on the radio. I'm listening now. Everything's perfectly fine. Well, they just don't want you to know. That's what it is. Not everybody's covering this. But this is life and death. And so more and more people jumped on the bandwagon. They were getting panicky. It was pretty serious. It got to be so serious that now people were showing up at police stations and other municipal localities and flooding the phone lines and wondering what is going on and getting no answers. It was a total disaster, it seemed like. And so it was that everybody was in panic mode, or so it seemed, or too many were. And if that wasn't enough, then the announcer finishes by saying, the situation is getting worse here in Grover Mills. And we were told a half an hour ago that the New Jersey State Militia, 7,000 strong, was being called out here, but apparently they've been burned and destroyed by the heat ray. And that's all we know. If that situation gets soon and gets any worse, we'll let you know. But at this point, we're taking you to Washington, D.C., where the President of the United States will soon speak. And they had, among their actors, a person who could magnificently imitate FDR. And so, with the Roosevelt speech to the nation, it went something like this. Citizens of the nation, I shall not try to conceal the gravity of the situation that confronts the country, nor the concern of your government in protecting the lives and property of its people. We must continue the performance of our duties, each and every one of us, so that we may confront the destructive adversary with a nation united, courageous, and consecrated to the preservation of human supremacy on this earth. And it ended with an announcement that the U.S. Army was fully engaged and the city of New York was being evacuated. Yes, there was a great deal of panic. My question to you at this point, how would you like to be driven by panic and hysteria? You know, there are different challenges that come to Christians as well as to non Christians. There are trials and things that may occur that are beyond our wildest imaginations to have anticipated, and yet they happen. And the professional or the Christian that is well seasoned, is a veteran, not a novice, is not going to jump into panic mode. That would be the human nature thing to do, is to panic and think, oh, all is lost, because some people did that. There was a family that was interviewed. It's on YouTube. You can go there. And they explained how their parents had woken all of them up as children and brought them down into the living room and announced that dire circumstances were so bad out there that everybody was going to die. So they told their children that. And other people did the same thing. In New Jersey, quite a few people loaded up their vehicles and hightailed it to the mountains of the Poconos over in Pennsylvania across the Delaware River, thinking that might buy them some time and safety. And then other people decided, no, we're going to band together. We're going to have a posse. We're going to get here locally enough people to defend ourselves, defend Grover's Field. And that included one old codger that decided to join forces. And there he was in the woods near Grover Mills. And he had old Betsy in his hands. And he saw the target, an enemy. He thought it was a Martian machine that was 2 stories high that was going to march through knock down the trees and come at them, and didn't realize it was a water tower. It was kind of hard to see at night. And he opened up on it, fired 7 or 8 rounds of lead at it. Boom! Until he thought he had vanquished the enemy. Well, he was able to wipe out the water supply, and this kind of hysteria did not subside for quite a while. The thing that amazed Orson Welles when it was all over, because he was hounded by 70 or more reporters the very next morning, is that radio was not only influential, it was a major medium by which one could manipulate the masses emotionally. Nazi Germany was just starting to learn that. But it was like with Wells the next day, it's like, oh no, what have we done? And they created this hysteria. And the people across the country were driven by panic. They did not understand the concept, in your patience possess ye your souls. Now, that statement is out of Luke 21 and verse 19. Luke 21 and verse 19. And here I find it interesting that it's interspersed with so many other elements of the Olivet prophecy. You read about war and rumors of war, about earthquakes and happening in diverse places. You can read about the gospel going out to the world before the end comes, about the heavenly signs, about Christ's return. All of these things are very, very important themes that belong in the Olivet prophecy. But basically, in the heart of it, in the middle, is in your patience, possess ye your souls. You can take a look at that. It's Luke 21, verse 19. And it's a very important concept because we're not going to be blown about by every wind of doctrine if we adhere to this. We're going to be circumspect. We're going to be objective. We're not going to jump at the first thing that comes along or the first person to claim a particular belief. We're going to understand the value of holding to our roots and to hold fast to that which is good, that which is reprovable over and over and over again, such as the keeping of the Sabbath or the holy days or the plan of salvation, or what happens after we die. What is God's purpose for man? The major fundamental questions that were eloquently addressed by Dr. Ward. These are the things that don't move. They're unchangeable. And frankly, they're non-negotiable. And these are the elements that anchor us to the truth and never to be taken for granted. And if anybody's been in God's church for any length of time, you understand just how important that is. So in Luke 21 in verse 19 says, "In your patience possess you your souls." And then it goes on to say, "And you shall see Jerusalem encompassed by armies." You'll know that the time of desolation is nigh. There are other events that have been happening, and this coronavirus being one that appears to be a prelude to more challenging events down the road. We know that that's how things unfold with the Olivet prophecy. Earthquakes and hail and other seeming acts of nature have been with us for thousands of years. But what makes it so significant now is that the prophecies that are being fulfilled in an intensified way. So we find that we live in increasingly dangerous times. That's enough to rattle some people. There was one woman who I remember showed some interest in the church a long time ago, and she just mentally froze. Couldn't accept anything about the future. She just wanted some nice, cozy nook, some safe haven, some place that she could protectively take care of her children, which now were young adults and ready to go out on their own. She said, "I just don't want the drama. I just don't want the drama of the future." There's nothing that any of us can do to accommodate that concern because we live in the world that we live in. We didn't choose it. We didn't make it this way, really. And we have not embraced it. We've tried to come out of the wrong elements of it. And we've done that because we're citizens of a different future. Therefore, we have to approach the future with a mature patience. Now, when we see the word patience here in Luke 21 and elsewhere, it appears 27 times in the New Testament. The word is so well chosen. If you expand it, in the Greek, it's actually a compound word, two words. Like a compound word would be raincoat. Uh, and you could take two words in Greek and put them together and make the one word that indicates patience. And those words are hooper or hupo, and then the other is mone. Hooper mone, if you put the two together. Hooper means under, mone means to abide. So part of a Christian's experience in life is often to abide under, to be able to carry certain weight on our shoulders. And maybe it makes life a little more difficult, but we learn to do that. We learn to serve, we learn to help, and we give of ourselves, and we go through growing pains with that. And over time, we mature, and we're able to do that increasingly. And then there's a certain patience and a certain maturity that's developed. And this hypermone is what encapsulates all of that, plus other concepts. When we read hypermone appearing or translated patience in the New Testament, uh, when we understand it in the context of the sentences that it appears, we conclude that patience does not mean apathy. Patience does not mean a lack of interest or concern. Quite the opposite. Patience is not emotional laziness or indifference. Not at all. But it's hard to find just one word in English which is the ideal match. And so the translators did a great job to be able to utilize hupomone or to translate it into English concepts that would relate to the audience. And so patience implies the ability to handle suffering, the ability to handle endurance, the ability to handle waiting for the determination of a will, and it implies being courageous, alert, circumspect, and actively resistant to wrong influences such as the ways of Satan. All of this is a great mindset to be in the time of the end. In your patience possess ye your souls. Further, we can elaborate from this that hupomone indicates that those that exercise it have strengthened the spirit, have calmed the temper, have been able to overpower anger, their own anger. Now, that's a big accomplishment for people that struggle like that. Extinguishing envy. That's another concept, another one of the wonderful fruits of hupomone. The defeating of pride in oneself, the bridling of the tongue, and the crush against temptation. These are wonderful attributes. And 27 times that concept is drawn on. And James talks about acquiring patience. He says, "My brethren, count it all joy when you fall into diverse temptations, knowing this, that the trying of your faith works patience. Let patience have her perfect work." So those are timeless directives that we can forever be rooted in. Absolutely a blessing. Patience is much needed as an attribute for a Christian to possess. And what we are doing is basically no different than what our spiritual ancestors have done in the past that have been so magnificent in their pursuit of God, even though they were imperfect and made numerous mistakes. I'd like to take a look at a passage of scripture that is very, very important here, and that regards that of Elijah. Elijah was a man after God's heart most of the time, and over in 1 Kings, he is challenged. He was under the false belief that he was the only loyal supporter of God left in all of Israel. Well, there were never many, and the ones that existed stuck out like sore thumbs, and some of them had to be hidden for a time because they lived in dangerous situations. But in 1 Kings chapter 17, we would read where Elijah finally agrees to meet with the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel. Mount Carmel is a majestic mound that overlooks the port of Haifa today in Israel. And you can see all the way across, it seems, the Mediterranean Sea. And that is where the 450 prophets of Baal and Elijah had their big showdown. And as it was, Elijah said, "Well, if God be God, follow him." And then the opposite side said, "No, no, if Baal be God, we'll worship Baal." They fully expected that they would be vindicated, that Baal would arrive and show great power in endorsing these people. As it turned out, Elijah was the only one that got any results. Elijah was dynamic. I wonder how long he had been aware that he was going to have this confrontation. If it was you, if it were me, I imagine that if it was like a week, down the road, we would probably have a week's worth of sleepless nights waiting for it, being geared up for it. And you're just ready to reach that plateau where your energy and your adrenal glands and everything about your energy, your focus, all comes together before that one showdown. I mean, naturally, the body would move in that direction. So this was what was this background of, I won't say pressure, but circumstances by which Elijah was operating. I think he was concerned but confident that God was going to be there for him. And so he was very sarcastic against Baal, and he challenged the believers, "Where is this God? He's not here. Is he gone to the bathroom? Is he in trouble? Is he unavailable? Does he exist?" And Elijah said, "Well, you need to make more noise. You need to really rattle his cage, get his attention, get him to come." And that made the prophets clamor all the louder. But no Baal ever showed up. And this went on for perhaps hours. All the altar was destroyed, people dancing, running around, and screaming, slicing themselves, challenging Baal to rescue them before they would bleed to death. Just unbelievable beliefs that a lot of people held back at that time. And so this went on until evening almost. And then Elijah rebuilt the temple altar of God and then went ahead, poured water over the altar many times, then called fire down from heaven. And God delivered. It was a tremendous witness. And I think that any of us, if we had done the same thing, we would have had a great feeling inside. Yes, yes, we've demonstrated what is true. And God has backed it up. And Baal is a totally worthless object. So that's the way it came out. And then an unprecedented event to follow right away after 3.5 years of no rain to have a deluge of water. And Elijah spoke with authority and told Ahab, you better get back to your village before the floods come, because it will be extremely difficult after that. Elijah himself turned around and then ran almost 30 miles across the valley of Jezreel to get out of harm's way. That was a dynamic demonstration of faith. And then you would think Elijah would be continuously on the top of the world. But that's not exactly how things played out. And so I go to 1 Kings chapter 19, verse 14. And Elijah and God are now talking. God has all of Elijah's attention. And Elijah's dejected. He's spent physically and he's spent spiritually too. This can happen. People can get worn to frazzle. You know that if you're not careful and you don't renew your spirit with God every day, that you run the risk of drifting away from Him, maybe even apostatizing. It's when we're close to God that we receive more of God's Spirit, which guides us into all truth, John 16:13. And God's Spirit is a spirit of power, 2 Timothy 1, verse 7, and of a sound mind. And when we have that, then we have spiritual focus. And the things of God make more sense to us. When we're drifted far, far away from God, we leave Him out of our lives. We're not praying, we're not studying, we're not renewing God's Spirit. Then all sin and evil becomes more possible, more attractive, and more dangerous. And so we dare not allow ourselves to decline in that direction. That being said, we know that God will be close to us if we're close to Him. If not, then the classic question does arise, and it's been raised for many centuries. If God is to be with us, and we're to be with God, and there's a breakdown in that relationship, who moved? It's doubtful that it was God. God doesn't make mistakes. He would never be negligent about renewing His power source if He indeed had to have one. And so it is, human beings have to follow the same example. We've got to be able to renew ourselves. That's mentioned over in 2 Corinthians 4, that the inward man is renewed day by day, even if outwardly we perish more and more day by day. It's the inward man that is so important. That's everything. And that's what we have to be able to uh, zone in on. So it's up to us. We can choose our own future, write our own ticket, so to speak. And we have every reason to do that. Now, if we look through the Bible, we have seen other people besides Elijah be in panic mode. But what was amazing about Elijah was he got, when God was able to talk to him, he said, "Oh, my Creator, just kill me. Kill me. I'm no better than my fathers. I'm spent. I'm done. I'm done. You know, I'm the last one around. It seems like all the other prophets are gone or they're silenced. It seems like King Ahab and Jezebel, they're not going to change. I know that. They're going to steer the nation into worse depths of deprivation. I just, degradation. I've just had it with life. And I'm cashing in my chips. I want out right now. prior to that point, he was afraid that somebody might kill him, and he hid. Now he's saying, okay, it's enough. Let me die. That's spiritual imbalance. It's unacceptable spiritual imbalance. It can't be one way, one place, and then the total opposite. But that's the way he was. God appreciated his valiant efforts, but then he had to get him into seeing things in perspective. And he says, look, get this idea out of your head. I've got work for you to do. You go to anoint this king, take care of this problem and this issue, and start to train somebody you'll be a mentor for. And there are different important events that are critical that we need you to preside over and be a part of. So just get that out of your head and don't worry about the king and queen. So Elijah was told to get his act together. And this was necessary because he had drifted so far apart. It wasn't intentional, but he had been on the run and had probably been sleep deprived. And his adrenaline peaked at the time of the showdown with the prophets of Baal. And then he ordered their executions. But as the hours went by, it was like, oh, I can just relax. But more than that, what am I really accomplishing here? Seems like some projects go in circles. And he was discouraged. He just needed somebody to care and lift him up and refocus him on what was important. But if that didn't happen, maybe if somebody else were to walk on by, one of the Philistines or a false prophet, and Elijah says, go ahead and kill me, then perhaps that would have happened. That's not the way it should be for the heroes of God. I can remember Mr. Armstrong saying on different occasions, he says, I hope and I trust that I'll be loyal to the end. He says, and there are some people in their older age, and he thought of Elijah a little bit, and Eli in 1 Samuel 3, and others that had a good track record, but then they got into some dangerous territory and needed a course correction. So God loves us, and He'll give us that if that's what it takes, if that's what's needed. But it's understandable that all of us have at times been in panic mode and fled. Christ's disciples did that. Peter thought, oh, Lord, I'll never deny you. And sure enough, he did it 3 times before the rooster crowed. John Mark was among those that panicked on the day of the crucifixion. You can find throughout the Bible different people that went into panic mode, and it was not necessary. It just wasn't. David being one, and I've already talked about that, where he was running away from Saul so often that he decided, well, it's got to be better with the Philistines. I just owe it to myself to go there for refuge. But that's historically been the enemy. Why would you do that? That makes no sense at all, and we should understand that. So that wasn't part of the equation. And finally, I'm sure Elijah repented of this wrong approach, thinking that it was all on his shoulders. Remember, Moses was dealing one crisis after another in the wilderness with the Israelites, and then he lost it. He snapped. He went too far and struck the rock several times in order to get the people water. And he didn't do it in the manner that God had wanted. And it was a very, very critical error. And if it did not go corrected, it would have set a bad precedent that could have induced other Israelites to make major sins. And God decided, no, I cannot afford that. I have to stop this. And I won't say it's nip it in the bud, but stop it in its tracks because it's starting to grow. And people are getting the idea that that's the way to do things. In fact, that isn't. No way. But some people have been in panic mode. David was one, and he ran to the Philistines and managed to straddle the fence for a while And God was merciful and didn't force him to have to choose between the Philistines and the Israelites in future warfare. David was cunning when he says, Lord Achish, if the day happens that we find my former friends, you will know what your servant can do. And that could have been a sudden jolt for Achish. As it turned out, uh, David and his men were sent back, and perhaps God had a hand in this to keep them from being in the battle. So God can steer events and steer us through minefields if he has to. We're to try to avoid the minefields, but if we can't, or God arranges where we are in them for a while, it's just all the more reason to trust in God. All the more reason to trust in God. And why wouldn't we want to do that? In our patience possess we our souls. So David was one that went into panic mode and tried to solve things on his own. And then he must have repented later because he was blessed by God. And he had to come to the point where he knew that getting in bed with the enemy was insane. The Philistines were not going to change who they were. So if we examine the Bible, there are other people that started out in a zealous way and then got overwhelmed. Uh, I marvel then, because that's how typical it is, that there was someone like Noah who was so consistent and just even keeled and spent the allotted time to put that ark together. Several of us have been to the Ark expedition in Kentucky, and it's an awesome recreation of the Ark, and it's built on calculated guesswork, and there's a plausible reason why the Ark was constructed to look just the way this one on display is. And it took, with machinery, 2 years to construct. And they have time-lapse photography of it, which is quite interesting to watch when you're waiting in line to go into this edifice. Uh, Absolutely fascinating. But it took, in real time, for Noah, we were guessing 40 years with the help of 3 sons, but maybe he was wealthy enough to hire laborers. I can imagine the irony of people building the ark and thinking, well, I think I'll retire. I've had this job for 55 years. It's time to do something else. Like, well, this was an interesting project, but there's no need to perpetuate it. I never did agree with that man anyway. But the money was good. Uh, I don't know how it played out, but it says a lot when God chooses not to say, and there were problems, but my servant overcame them. There just is no negativity at all. Noah believed God. He acted on God's behalf. He got the project done on time, maybe under budget, and everything worked. In our patience, possess we our souls. We have a future when we have self control. We have a future when we understand what we're shooting at, when we want to uphold the doctrines of the church. They lead to eternal life. They are a blessing, and God talks about that through David, who loved his law and loved and admired all of the statutes and understood what it was like to have them, what it was like to live without them. These are things that we cannot discount. John Mark, I've mentioned him, was one that went into panic mode. Some of the people in ancient Israel that were part of the kingdom of Judah or of Israel, Jehoshaphat, Hezekiah, and other kings were up against the wall, so to speak. And several of them made the right choices. And then by doing that, they were able to regain their souls, in a sense. That's figurative language, but able to get spiritual equilibrium back. And we have to have that. If we don't, we're going to be the ones to panic in the future. We're going to freak out at the next virus epidemic. These are things that are called the beginning of sorrows. There are other things in the works, but we're at the point now where things can turn on a dime and major events can change and things can come and go so quickly. And then we might be startled by different announcements, just as happened with the Martian invasion, so called. All of that, talking about the future and all of the obsessions that people had with the Martian invasion under Orson Welles' directorship, all points us back to the fact that human beings have the proclivity to assume the worst, to find the hole in the donut, to see what's wrong with the world, see wrong everywhere. Well, there's some things that are right with the world, but because of misliving over all of these last decades, we are in a dangerous situation and we could lose this country. Hopefully, it won't happen that way. Hopefully, people will make and rediscover God and make Him a part of their being. No, the future could be very, very bright for this country, and if not, at least for individuals and handfuls of people around the earth, if it be just that. But God is a proactive God. He's a loving God. He's forgiving. He's looking for people to change and repent. And in this time, maybe He's found a few, and He knows that there are others yet to come. We know that eventually in the book of Revelation, they'll all be given their one real opportunity, if they haven't already. They will appear before Christ, and He'll be able to work with them through us and others, work with them for considerable time periods. It's a proposition that's more than fair. It is one of the key ways in which the plan of salvation is put together. We have to be wise stewards of our time so that we can always make the time to be close enough to God when we need to. We need to have His help. We need to have His support. We need to have His directorship, His inspiration, that through His Holy Spirit to help us to be the people He wants us to be. That's not just empty rhetoric. That is what our future has to be. I mean, what else is more important than that? I don't know of anything. And to be in panic mode over all other events is ridiculous, because all of those other events will eventually be controlled by God's ways, God's standards, God's Spirit. We have an exciting future ahead of us, and my time has come to a close. So I will just recount the key points here, and that is, in our patience, in our hupomone, possess we our souls. We're going to want to make time to be with God, especially if we haven't up till now, so that we don't become a castaway, that we can be rooted in His way of life and uphold it and live it and display it just by being the people that God wants us to be. And when we are patient, we are mature. We are less hasty. We think things through. We make the right decisions. We rely on God. We have His help. And we don't panic. We don't say, oh no, all these things are happening in the world. I don't know what's next. I can't believe it's happening. Well, believe it. We've known about it for a long time. And what are we going to do about it? Hopefully, we're going to be proactive with God. If we do that, God will be pleased with us. He will bless us. He will never leave or forsake us. And that is going to be worth everything in the future. So let's strive to do that. Let's remember that even though the War of the Worlds was absolute fiction, our challenges are very real. And the casualties and the successes are very real. We need to endure to the end so that we can hold fast to that which is faithful and true.